Hey guys, so today I wanted to share with you how to actually set up the VIOFIO A129 Duo. And no, I cannot pronounce that. But what we have here is the dash cam itself, a hardwire kit that VIOFIO actually has for the dash cam setup so that it runs overnight, and a simple plain pair of wire strippers and crimper, and a piggyback system for your fuses, your SD card, and your fuse mat. Now let me go a little bit more in depth here. These two items you can just go on Amazon, and I'll provide a link in the description below, but these two you're not going to have to do too much research for if you've already decided on which dash cam you want. This product as well, you're not going to need to do too much research for it. You can use a regular pair of wire strippers or even a pliers. And that's primarily for these piggyback fuses that you would put into your fuse panel. And all the wire strippers for is one, stripping the wires on the hardwire kit if it's not done already, which I believe in this one it is. And then you would crimp it here for that connection point. I typically like to put a little bit of electrical tape on either end just to make sure that it won't come apart. And then when you're doing your SD card, you just want to make sure that you get something that's actually high endurance, so something that's going to be constantly overwriting, such as the dash cam. You're going to make sure that you want something that's high endurance for that. Anything from 64 gigabytes and up should be fine. Now the fuse mat here that I have is actually for a 2015 RAV4 LE. And this is what I'm going to use later to decide which fuses that I'm going to be plugging in my hardwire kit to. Oh, by the way, if I haven't mentioned already, the hardwire kit is just going to be an additional power source as opposed to using the one that comes with the box. I will be using this so that I can more cleanly set it up in the vehicle and you don't see a bunch of cables and wires hanging around. So something I had to do a little bit of research on was, what type of fuses or what size fuses I need for the dash cam. And after doing a bit of research, I found out for the Viofo A129 Duo, it only requires about a 3.1 amp to supply the power to the dash cam. So I got something here that's for 5. Basically all that means if the current goes past 5 amps, then the little circuit in here would break, the metal piece there, it would break and it would protect your dash cam. Now to unbox everything. Alright. This is one that I felt was the best bang for your buck, and I'll provide a YouTube video link below to kind of show, well, some of the research someone else did to kind of help me make my decision on this. Sorry if the video is a little shaky, but I'm working with one hand here. So here we have the front dash cam. Here we have the rear dash cam. Put that to the side. Front dash cam's a nice size. Has some 3M tape on the back so you can mount it right to your windshield. Got your SD card slot, your mic, and I guess a little recording light. I think that's what it is. This is for your rear dash cam. Got your user manuals, but if you follow this video, don't think you'll need it too much. Except for maybe your settings and stuff. You might want to look at it for that. Got some extra mounting tape here in case you need to move it from vehicle to vehicle. Usually you can remove it from your vehicle using a little bit of a heat from a heat gun or a hair dryer if the heat gun isn't an option. But a little bit of a heat gun and some Goo Gone, which is a spray that removes adhesive, should just do the trick. I don't think it would leave much adhesive, but it's always that possibility. Panel remover, which will be good for when you're trying to access the fuse box underneath your instrument cluster. Here you have USB cable, plug into your computer. So the way these cameras talk is through this cable. They're both USB male ends, and they're gonna be plugging into both of these. So essentially what happens is, this wouldn't be your normal power source, right? Plug it into your 12-volt outlet for your accessories. This goes to this, the main dash cam, which is in the front, which then transfers through this, a male end, seems like USB 2.0, to the rear cam, and that's how they communicate and power each other. So you don't need a second power source, which is another struggle that I went through to find out. So that's pretty much it for the unboxing. Now, the part that I bought to kind of replace the main power source, which is kind of a bit of a bulky item that you plug into your 12-volt outlet. And if you're like me, you don't want to take up that accessory port if your vehicle doesn't have too many of those to begin with. So rather than using this, I will be using this, the Hardwire kit that Viofo actually offers for their cameras, for the dash cams. Take this out for you. Put this away. Okay, now that's all away. Let's take out this Hardwire kit. Come on. All right. So basically what this Hardwire kit allows you to do is to power on the dash cam at night, even after the normal power source has gone off. And there's a little switch down here that will actually let you choose which setting to put it on. So basically what this does is it allows you to protect your car's battery from dying because the dash cam has been drawing too much power from it. And so that's what this does. It cuts it off at a certain power that you set it to say, hey, dash cam, stop taking more power from the battery, otherwise the car is going to die and you won't be able to start it in the morning. So it's a nifty little tool. This end goes into the dash cam for the power source. And then you'll actually see here that there are 3 separate cables. This black one here is for your ground. And basically you just hook this up to a metal point of contact that connects to your car's overall body or chassis. And that way it grounds the current. Next, you're gonna have your ACC power, which if I'm not mistaken, this should be your switch fuse. Otherwise, you know, a fuse that kind of turns off when the car turns off. And here, the red wire, the last wire, is gonna be your battery plus fuse. Basically all this is the power source that's gonna be always constantly running. So typically it'll run off the yellow, which is your switch. So when the car's on, it's not utilizing this little logic in here that says to turn off the battery because your car's running. And so you have your alternating belt turning, which is going to constantly charge your battery. So you don't have to worry about it. And then when you shut the car off, this little logic in here will say, well, if I'm not getting power from here, I'm going to get the power from here instead. And this power is going to be a constant switch or constant fuse. This constant fuse is going to be always having power, something like possibly your door lock system. So when you press your remote, there's always power to your doors that opens it. So you would hook up this red wire to that. Something similar to that fuse connection. Now, one thing I should note is that you can pretty much use any fuse connection you want, as long as the yellow is for a switched fuse and the red is for a constant fuse. Now you're probably wondering, what do I do with these 2 fuse ends? Doesn't look like this actually plugs into anything. Definitely not your typical, accessory port for your 12-volt outlet, nor your fuses. So what we actually have here is basically piggyback fuses, and they go by a few other names, but that's what I remember it as. And a piggyback fuse is fairly common. This generic one is probably going to be good for just about anything that you want to do for in terms of accessories for your vehicle. Reason being why I say this is somewhat universal is because here you can see that there's 2 ports, and so you fill these 2 ports with whatever the designated fuse port is recommending. In our case, since I did a little bit of research beforehand, but this also kind of clarifies it. So from this bag, from the original power source that the dash cam provides you, you can see here that it says the output is going to be 5 volts DC and 3.1 amps. The amperage is really what we care about here. So we know that this is going to be pulling about 3.1 amps. Maybe not all of it at the same time, but it's rated for up to there. So we know it's going to be pulling around that range. So that 3.1 amps is really what we're going to use to base off what type of fuses we're going to be putting in this piggyback fuse. So in our case, I know that we'll need at least 3.1 amps, so I'm going to be using a fuse that I think they actually included here in this. Right. So I will be using a 5 amp in our case. Now, some tricky things about these fuses is there's 4 types of these. For the most part, most cars only use 2 types. And for my case, of those 2 types, I think this is the mini. All that really means that's the size of the overall fuse. Now, each fuse type has its own rating, and in our case, we would be using 5 amps, which is also color-coded. So all that means is that if our power source that normally asks for 3.1 amps exceeds 5 at any point, it protects the hardware, in our case the dash cam, by breaking a tiny little circuit from within these fuses, thus discontinuing the power. Now, by no means, I'm not a specifically electrical guy, but this is just from the information that I've gathered. So now that you know which fuses you need and the correct amp rating, now we'll look at what it actually means to use one of these. The point that actually connects to the fuse box or the fuse panel is this point right here. The normal fuse that would go there would be inserted into the bottom half. So it's just like a normal connection through the bottom half. Now, the top, if you can look very closely, you'll see that one of these ends is actually different. Now that different end, the one from the top right here, is actually drawing power from the bottom fuse. Now that fuse is actually being connected to this red wire on the top and going to our new end user, or in our case the dash cam. So I will put whatever the original fuse rating is on the bottom, and I will put our 5 amp at the top. Now the only scenario that wouldn't really work for this is if you put a lower amperage rating. So let's say, for instance, instead of our 5 amp here that we would normally insert on top, we used a 10 on top, and then we actually had a 5 in a normal port on the bottom. Well, that would mean the 5 would break before the 10. Hypothetically speaking, if our dash cam actually required, let's say, 7 amps, well, then it wouldn't be getting its required source, because the 5 amp would actually break its circuit or blow its fuse prior to receiving its full amount that we would need for the dash cam. So put the higher of the 2 on the bottom and choose a fuse port that will provide that. Now, to connect one of these ends to this piggyback fuse, all you would do is insert it like so, and then get your wire crimper and squeeze down on this blue part here. Now that I have it inserted, just put it in to the bottom notch here so that I can press down on that blue shelling. As you can see, after crimping it, I just made 2 notches so that the exposed metal wire inside was actually being pinched against the metal casing on the inside. That's what it comes out looking like. And now to wrap it all up, I'm gonna put some electrical tape here and here just to make sure that if it ever gets tugged on, the wire won't come apart and you'll have to redo this again. Alright, now that we finally have that done, putting the electrical tape on and doing it the same thing to the other wire as well. I've also dropped in our fuse at the top port like we talked about. The orientation that you put this in, whether it be right side up or upside down, it doesn't really seem to have an effect on the output. So you'll see at the very tip of the fuse that it actually reads a number 5. So whether that's up or down doesn't really matter as long as it's in the top socket, or right now in the bottom, but in the early scenario it would be in a top socket where it connects directly off of the red wire. Now on to the next part. After that's all done, we're gonna choose fuse ports that we will connect this to. And we're gonna choose a point to ground this to. How do we choose that? I go to the fuse panel cover. Typically this fuse panel cover is located under the dash of the driver's seat. And typically on the left hand side, somewhere around the OBD reader. And it looks something a little bit like this. Now what this tells me is the different types of fuse and amperage that is rated for each of these ports. Now there's a much more extensive YouTube video that I will link in the description below to kind of go in more detail about that if you're curious. But for our purposes, we just need to know that this is what the existing amperage is. Now take note, this is a Toyota 2015 RAV4 LE. So that means it does not have a sunroof or fog lights, which was somewhere here. So although it displays that there is an amperage rating here, that does not necessarily mean those fuse ports are occupied by those fuses. So in our case, I will likely be trying to tap into one of those for a switched fuse supply. Another question I found myself asking, well, how do I know exactly what some of these not so obvious naming conventions mean? And for that, you can look it up on Google or something to just kind of look up your car's model and owner's manual. Typically the owner's manual will show this diagram and give you an in-depth description on what the fuse name actually is. Typically a lot of people like to use the outlets that they already have for their accessories, which is perfectly fine, but my version of the fuse panel actually has an open port already. I'm going to go ahead and be using that instead. And to do that, all I would have to do, rather than piggybacking off another fuse, I will just throw in another 5 in here to the bottom port as well. Now just be aware, there are other types of connector ends that you can use rather than a piggyback system if you have an open port. For me, the open port was just something I had already, so I'm going to use that. But otherwise, you would connect your normal power source that came in a Hardwire kit to a different end that would pretty much look just like a regular fuse, and that would be what you would want to connect to here. Well, how do I know which fuses are going to be powered on when the car turns on and powered off when the car turns off? And so there's a couple methods you can do. The method I started off with was really just trial and error, turning on and off the car for my previous dash cam. However, an alternate method that's a little bit more involved and you may need some extra tooling is the a multimeter essentially, which you would kind of take a multimeter and connect one end to one end of the fuse and take the other end to a ground point somewhere, and just to see if the car turns on or off when the car's on or off. But for our purposes, trial and error and a little bit of common sense. For me, the sunroof will typically not be operational when the car is off. So for me, that's a good indication that that's probably our switched fuse port that I can utilize for our ACC power. The other fuse port that I will also be utilizing is likely the rear doors, and that will be connected to our battery plus wire from our Hardwire kit. Now, if you liked that video, just go ahead and give it a thumbs up. You know, this was just kind of something I quickly put together because I had to do it anyways. You don't need to subscribe because, well, I'm not really that popular. But if you did like the video and found the information valuable, go ahead and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And stay tuned for a part 2 where I actually do the physical install on the car itself. And I'll show you for the Toyota 2015 RAV4 LE. Thank you all so very much for watching, and stay tuned for that part 2.